Kate Naess is a Deakin alum, a Paralympian, a psychologist, a coach, and an author whose life and career are connected by a mindset on how to respond to challenges. From rising to an elite level in two completely different sports to balancing multiple roles with motherhood, Kate is a master of challenging expectations. From the lands of the Wurundjeri people, this is Stories of Wonder. Kate Naess, welcome to Stories of Wonder.
Thanks, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. So you're a Paralympian, you're a registered psychologist, a keynote speaker, a high-performance coach, a mum, and now an author. Your career spans so many different worlds. So I'm curious, when you zoom out and look at it all, what feels like the thread that's connecting everything together?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, zooming out and thinking about the thread that connects it all together, I guess probably is something that was instilled for me from a mindset perspective when I was quite young. And I was always given opportunity to try things, especially being born with a hand difference. And I think for me that set me up to always have the desire to try, challenge and learn. I've always loved learning. I still do. I'm so fascinated by what humans are capable of. And I think for me, through various experiences, I see how quick, life, we lose loved ones or things can happen to us from a health perspective. And so for me, I'm about just trying to seize the moment and have no regrets.
Mm-hmm. And you do talk about how everything comes down to how you respond to the hand you're dealt, which again is the name of your book that's here with us today. Where did this mindset begin for you? And I guess, how did you start navigating that at, I assume, a pretty young age? Yeah,
so I was born with a hand difference, and my parents didn't know I was going to be born with a hand difference until I was born. So you can imagine, obviously, having your child and then seeing that there was a physical difference would have been a bit of a shock initially for them. What came next, though, was probably the crux of it that actually had a catalyst moment for my parents, but also what became the foundations for me and my mindset, because the doctors said to my parents that my life was going to be really hard. It was going to be really difficult. I wouldn't be able to do things like ride a bike properly, tie my shoelaces. I have finger buds. They had suggested removing them. So you can imagine what that would be like as a parent, not only just realising, our daughter has a physical difference, but being told that that's going to make my life harder or be very limiting in what I can and can't do. And when my parents got over that initial shock and grief, they realised that I actually hadn't lost anything. So I hadn't lost a hand. I was perfectly whole as I was. And so they challenged the assumption that were being made about what my life was going to be like from the doctors. And they then decided from that day on, Kate will try and learn and do whatever she would like to. And if she doesn't do it the way that we assume is normal, then we will try and figure out another way for her to do it. And from then on, it just, it's established the foundations for me just to try different things and never be worried about trying new things. And it just allowed my life to flourish from a young age.
Amazing foundations that they set, and amazing, a big list of decisions that they had to be confronted with in how to navigate that. Let's talk about your early days a little bit. So as you said, you were born with a hand difference. You've spoken about moments growing up when you were told certain things wouldn't be possible, even things like playing the violin or riding horses. So you've spoken about how your parents dealt with that. For you, as you moved through those early years, when you were confronted with those sorts of, you're not going to be able to do things, can you talk me through how you started navigating those and how you started going, we'll see about that?
I think from a young age, it wasn't as simple or as straightforward all the time, especially as I got older and probably at the latter end of primary school, going into teenage years. If, people reflect on teenage years, there's always a bit of, it's a tough time, and it can be,
Yes.
and just navigating life. And for me, I actually was quite self-conscious about my hand, probably more so, if I reflect back now, more in primary school. I actually used to dread going to school, like back to school in February, because it was so hot, and I used to like to wear my jumper so it covered my hand. And but everyone knew, right? So my parents had spoken to all the teachers. They all knew, and they were set up in ways to support me there. But I still had that, the human side to being vulnerable and showing my full self. But I think what really supported me was having people that have your back, right, that are always going to go in and see things a bit differently, that can actually limit things that are going to come up for you as barriers. And my parents did that by speaking with the school and all that. And it didn't always mean there weren't going to be sort of hurdles to get over. Like sometimes teachers' best interests at heart would still be like, can you do that, or rushing me to do something which is going to take me longer to do, and they're not really realising. And so it was just trial and error, and I guess going with it and seeing what happened. I think kids are curious. I talk a lot about curiosity these days around, with adults especially, what I didn't have when I was younger, which I realise now as an adult myself with young kids, is kids are fabulous at just being curious and asking questions, and it doesn't come from ill intent. It's just what we then start to, frame it as. They learn that it's a right or wrong thing. So what happened for me as a kid was people would be curious about my hand, but realise, maybe they can't ask or do that. And so then it kind of became this thing if they would see my hand at school. And so I was always felt like I had to hide it to avoid that.
So it was almost like a shared awkwardness by both sides.
Yeah, and so now it's like, well, if people are more curious and feel more normal about just having the conversation about something like disability, then it isn't as confronting for me or them, and it just is normal. So I think that's something that helped a lot when I was younger, and then, just trying different things.
So it was mostly trial and error.
Trial and error.
Through the way.
Still is.
And how did this influence you? Was there anything in it about proving people's assumptions wrong, and what were your assumptions about what your abilities were, I guess, case by case? Were there some that you were like, I think I can figure this out, or were there some that were quite daunting, but you gave a go anyway? Yeah.
Well, I still haven't mastered the monkey bars. Maybe that's something I will
that is very
figure
fair.
out at some point.
Mm-hmm.
From memory, for me, I was just a kid that liked to try new things, and maybe I was just born stubborn. Maybe that got me by. But I remember wanting to try to ride the bike, and yes, it wasn't that safe initially, because I couldn't necessarily use the brakes. But then we learnt, when I say we, my parents were pivotal in all of these alternative ways of doing things when I was younger. But having brakes on the pedals was something that was really important for me, and playing the violin at school, our class was learning the violin in grade 3, and initially the teachers, not through ill intent, but like, well, you can't play the violin, how are you going to hold the violin bow? So you can do something else while the kids are playing the violin. And my parents were like, well, we don't know how she's going to hold the violin bow, but there's no way she's not going to be included in that class. And back then, the myoelectric hand, the prosthetic, was being developed, and there's some amazing prosthetics out there now. And I was about 7 at the time, so being fitted with a prosthetic would be the same as you getting a prosthetic over your hand. It felt so foreign because I'd learnt to do so many different things without it. But it turned out it actually helped me hold the violin bow because I could actually open and close it. And then all of a sudden I was playing the violin. So I think we have to really challenge assumptions that we make about others, but when they're made about ourselves, really lean in and, are we actually believing what is being said about us, and where's the evidence in that, and how much do we want things to be different if we want to try something or learn something new, or Because I think once I'm told I can't, then something kicks in and I'm like, well, hang on, wait, I can.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably, if we go back to when you said earlier about the thread that's been through it all, I think that's probably been one of the biggest.
I think so. So we move on, and you started riding horses at a pretty young age as well, and you went on to represent Australia. Looking back, what did the early years of sport give you? And, were there moments in those early years where, I don't know, you felt unstoppable?
I felt very stoppable, if we think about it. It's kind of ironic that I made a career in my later years as an athlete, yet I hated sport at school.
Really?
Yeah. So I hope I'm not sort of giving away too much here. She's a fraud. No.
You're a Paralympian who hates sport.
I
can see the
I
headline now.
hated sport at school.
Really?
So why? Probably because I was self-conscious about my hand. But at school, school sports were always like team sports. So like baseball, netball. All my mates were really good at netball. And so I was like, I didn't like, the competitive side to it there. Baseball, softball, I just didn't love it. I was not a runner, like any kind of athletic sports. I remember I hyperventilated doing the 800 metre at school. Like I was just not that way inclined.
Did you ever have to do like the 2K run? Is that it?
I don't know. Yeah. I'll never forget
Beep
that 800. Oh yeah, that was full on. And I went to school with a guy that ended up becoming an AFL player and a pretty good one. So he kind of put us all to shame. But I didn't like it then. But I loved horse riding, and that was still trial and error, trying to figure out how to hold the reins. Yeah. We did try and use the My Electric Hand for riding once. And
how did you end up doing it? Yeah, did it fly off?
Well,
what happened?
I did. So we had the My Electric Hand connected, like attached to the rein.
Yeah.
And I was only learning to ride at this stage. So my horse was probably, I felt like he was galloping, but he probably was just in a canter, and I've kind of fallen off. And by the time my mum came over and realised, she's okay, no broken bones or anything, we realised that I didn't have the prosthetic on. And so we looked over and my horse was still running, and this My Electric Hand is bouncing along. So even though I didn't like certain sports, there were still challenges for the horses and the sports I did like. I did love swimming as a kid, something about being in the water, and to this day, like I love swimming for that sort of mindful practice. And I chose the horses, obviously, at a younger age, so then just progressed that way. But, as I got into high school, hate to admit it, but I was the kid that used to wag sport and disappear when we had to go off and play against other schools.
Do you have a lot of notes from parents? Don't need to attend PE today.
I don't think they knew.
Right.
PE I did, but I wasn't.
This is a big reveal for them.
Yeah, I know. Well,
sorry, Mum and Dad.
It's all right. I made up for it now.
Yeah. Deakin comes into your life at some point. So you've studied a Bachelor of Applied Science, then a Graduate Diploma of Applied Psychology, and later a Master of Industrial and Organisational Psychology. How did you decide on this path from where you came from, and why Deakin?
Well, I definitely didn't initially feel I would end up in definitely doing a master's in org psych. That wasn't where it sort of started from that and working backwards. The whole interest in psychology came from a young age when I was so fascinated by how powerful our mind is. And perhaps that came through from, the assumptions people made about what I could or couldn't do. But then it progressed more as I got older and became a teenager. I had some health concerns, and it was more a mental thing more so than, just a physical thing. And so I was so curious about the mind and body connection. And I always loved being in places where if I did something and that was a catalyst for someone else to try something, that gave me a lot of it was just a really fulfilling, right? Sort of not like a mentor, and I don't like the word inspirational, but that kind of something that came about as I started to, play the violin and then move through doing different things. So I was like, wow, there's so much in the power of just our mindset and how we approach things. And so I was very curious. So I thought I'm always going to study psychology at some point. I then, as I got further up into sport, I realised there is this whole element of performance psychology and sports psychology. So I was curious about that. And I thought, where do I want to go with this? And now I probably could have just gone straight down pure psychology, but I chose not to, because why I chose the undergrad in applied science, because it gave me scope to actually try other sort of subjects that I actually had curiosity and interest about. And I think I'm grateful for that, because it gave me exposure to a more balanced approach. And then I started off doing like forensics in my fourth year.
Oh, really?
Turns out I really just like watching the shows. I don't want to study it. And then it turned out, it got to a point prior to doing my master's, so I didn't go all the way through back to back. So I had time off. I was competing overseas. I did some exams overseas. So I did the whole thing over probably too many years, but we finally got there.
Well, you've had a lot on.
Yeah, and the reason I ended up doing a Master's of Organisational Psychology was because as I was progressing and getting higher in my sport, I was learning about this performance psychology and the science behind high-performing teams and engagement and how do we get the best out of each other, our teams, etc. And then I would be working in a job where I would be like, surely there's more to this. We have to go to work like every day. It wasn't engaging, wasn't fulfilling, and I didn't really understand what it was at the time then.
What kind of job were you talking about?
I did lots of different jobs just through when I was studying. So I did some jobs in recruitment. I did some jobs in admin.
Yeah.
A lot of it sort of whatever balanced with me being able to be an athlete. And I just thought there's something about work. What is it that makes it tick, makes it really enjoyable? And that's where I started to get curious about what is the connection from a high-performance sport and the workplace. And this is where I really started to understand this concept around employee engagement and culture. And I was super fascinated about that, and also the power of leadership and the impact you can have on others. And that's where organisational psychology kind of came about. And initially I thought, there is no way in the world I'm going to do org psych. I do not want to be in a suit and I do not want to be in an office. And turns out it actually was where I needed to be.
Yeah.
So that's why the org psych masters came up, and I just explored that, and I'm so glad I did, and I'm so glad I still gave myself options along the way.
Yeah.
And why Deakin? Because Deakin was a university that saw me more than just a student. So I was an athlete, and they were very supportive of that. They were very supportive of me to do some exams overseas when I was training and competing over in Europe. And the flexibility for me was fantastic, because I was not close to the university, but I was able to do a lot of my study from where I was training. Down on the Mornington Peninsula. And then when I came to do my master's, ironically, it was the first time I was on campus for full time out of my whole academic career. And it was great. And still friends with people that I did my master's with back then.
That's great.
Today, yeah.
Interesting how you had to reframe the organisational psychology sort of studies a little bit, but there's a really clear thread in there in what you've been able to redefine that as and use that for and apply that to. Any highlights? So any lecturers that you particularly enjoyed learning from? Any friends you made along the way? Favourite cafe when you finally did do your masters here?
I was very fond of doing my masters here. I guess if we think about lecturers, so Simon Albright was my supervisor. He was very supportive of me. When it came to my thesis, I still didn't really know what I was doing, and so he was able to really support and guide and allow elements of what I was curious about come to fruition in my thesis. And Mark Stokes, he definitely had an impact, because I hated statistics. I'm not supposed to know if I'm supposed to say that out loud.
There's a lot being revealed today. Do like sports, hate statistics.
But I could do it, right? I don't know how. I just could do it. And Mark would come in, with his pretty sure he had an earring and his leather jacket, and I'm like, oh, okay, this didn't what I would make that assumption, which I should never do about, someone that does stats. And then I remember one day he said to me, Kate, I I need to have a chat with you after class. And I thought, oh, here we go. It was like high school all over again. What have I done now? And he said to me, he goes, oh, Kate, would you be interested in doing a PhD? And I kind of laughed, and I felt bad for laughing. I'm like, no. But maybe, never say never. But at the time, I just didn't see myself, I guess, in that area because I was probably still so passionate about my sport. But I loved that he saw something in me. He goes, I see you at the back, you're very quiet, but I know that you know what we're talking about and what we're doing. And so I'm like, wow, he saw something in me that I'd actually probably didn't give myself credit for. So that had an impact on me. And the people I went to school with, that I studied with, definitely a lot smarter than me, just put it out there. They're amazing to work with as peers doing masters. So they've all gone off and doing some pretty amazing things out there now.
That's good. Some good outcomes there.
Yeah.
What opportunities did you get through doing these courses at Deakin? Did it connect you with some organisations you wanted to work with, give you experiences as you were studying?
Yeah, it did. I had some great options for placement, especially my masters, and that was great because there wasn't necessarily always a clear path that I knew I wanted to go down, and so to have the options of trying different things was great. I did a placement at Telstra. I did another placement with a consultant, Gavin Freeman, who does a lot around sport as well as business, which was really exciting back then for me. And then I did another placement at Henrik and Struggles, a consulting firm, of which I'm still connected to someone that I worked under there and still do work with them today.
That's amazing. And as you move, when did the path that you're on now, as you were studying, begin to show itself? Because it sounds like there was still a lot of, it revealed itself to you eventually how what you're learning here can be implemented in a way that no one was quite doing that way at the time, or in a field that maybe we don't see that in. Yeah,
it's a great question. I guess I probably just always followed what I was passionate about and where that showed up and where the opportunity was. So that initially was around leadership development and team culture, and still learning as I went through, for example, the placements and then into jobs after uni. But I feel it's really coming to life, I'd probably say now. So it's just probably gone a bit over 10 years since I finished my masters.
Right.
So it has been a build and, steps along the way that are all connected. But now it's really coming to fruition where I can blend my, almost 2 decades in elite sport as an athlete, and then also working in high performance sport as well, leading wellbeing and leading Olympic and Paralympic teams, to then also the work I've done internally in internally in roles and then also externally as a consultant, blending this world now around high performance and what does it mean? Because there's so many things that I see that are quite similar. If we think about an elite athlete and we think about someone in the corporate world, so say professional services, so they're fundamentally the same in how they operate in high pressure, high stakes environments, right? There's always a lot of variables at play, outcomes, expectations for the athlete. It's medals, it's times, it's showing up and being able to get selected for certain races. If these don't happen, you lose money, you lose whatever it is. And then that impacts whether the team gets spots at big events, etc., and e.g. how many team members you might get at the Paralympic or Olympic campaigns. Now, someone in the corporate world actually is operating in the same way. High stakes, high pressure, got KPIs, got outcomes, got clients, got to win work, got to sell work, got to perform, right? However, the fundamental difference is athletes are strategically trained to recover and how to mentally recover and physically recover. Whereas in the corporate world, it's more around, we reward like the push and the, longer hours and that comes at a cost at some point. If an athlete operated like that, which a lot of athletes do, like to just do more, push harder, etc., it won't allow us to be able to perform at our best. It'll come at a cost, and usually that will show up as injury, etc. And in the corporate world, it doesn't show up as evidently as it does with athletes, right? So where we're seeing that is, the burnout is still a thing, and people feel like the more I push, after a while, over, a lot of time in certain roles, it then comes at a cost somewhere in their lives, whether it's in relationships, etc., sacrificing perhaps health, etc. So where I see this opportunity in the work I do today now is how I blend this and how we actually understand the human that is in these environments that we're operating in. And there's always an assumption when I go and have these conversations, but we're not athletes, right? You guys have coaches, you have all of this other support. And I said, we're advised on things, but it also is up to us in what we do and how we do. We do get a bit more of a strategy around when we're racing, when we're not, but we get taught this art of recovery that isn't about doing formal, processes around physical recovery and massage, whatever you kind of visualize when I talk about recovery. It's the mental side. It's how do I go from, I got 3 sessions in one day, all really hard. How do I go from the morning one that was shocking into a next one and show up like that morning didn't even happen? Right, so there's the art of how you can actually recover from moment, session to session, meeting to meeting, to be able to sustain it. Most of us don't
have
we just got to keep going
for that.
Yeah, so there were things that we taught, and what I have more so around my curiosity around as well, how we can function better as individuals, and a lot of that sits within us, but we just need to build that self-awareness of what they are. And then the so what of that is then it comes back to the culture, engagement, the ROI, so it all links together. So I'm still doing what I love, and it's just kind of all, I guess, been stepping stones along the way.
Well, speaking of high performance, while you were studying, as you mentioned, you were doing a lot of different things. So can you take us through all the different sort of plates you were spinning while you were doing your various studies, and what that was like to balance and how you were supported?
Sure. So my undergrad is a 3-year undergrad, which I believe, I hate to admit it, but I think it took me 7 years. That's a long time. I'm going to go check that. At least 5 years, maybe 7 to do. So I had time off. We've all got I've got one too. It's not quite that long, but it still is. It's long. I'm really going to check that. But that's a good example of the fact that you can get through it. And what I loved about actually taking my time in my undergrad in the profession that I was wanting to go down was I gained so much life experience while I was studying, right? And if I had gone and just rushed through it, I probably wouldn't be on the path I am today.
Yeah.
So I was very grateful for that. And I had the support of Deakin and being able, as I said earlier, to be overseas, to do my exams and still be able to train. So I was learning the academic side, but I was also learning the life skills and the side around, being resilient and showing up, and what it took to be dedicated and committed to actually go and do my exams somewhere overseas when, I could have chosen not to do that. But that was an option. So if I didn't have that as an option, it would have been a lot harder for me to finish my studies, even though it took forever. And then come to my 4th year, to my grad year, I actually split that over 2 years. My mum had breast cancer and had come back. So during that time, and I was her full-time carer. So it was really, really challenging time for me. And so I split the studies, the 1 year over the 2. And Deakin were really supportive about that. It wouldn't really matter why I was doing it, but that was okay. And it also gave me time to actually think about where did I want to actually focus on for my 4th year. And I actually ended up what I thought would be my passion around, sort of the forensic side. Turned out wasn't something I could probably live and breathe as a profession. I just really am curious about that space. And then I was able to then pursue something else when it came to my master's. And my master's was where I was able to actually be on campus full-time for the first time out of all my studies. So I really enjoyed coming on campus then, and totally different experience, but definitely all of them worked really well. Having the online opportunities, even when I was, through the undergrad, etc., was really great.
Yeah, good that you had that flexibility amongst all of that. And finally, in regards to Deakin, are there things that you learnt during your time here that you still use day to day in your work?
Yeah, the only constant is change. Something we talk about a lot. Simon was really influential, Simon Albrecht, in that, and our, the science practitioner model and approach to how we do things. How I write things, very influenced by even sort of some of the stuff in my book, how I would write things. You can't take the academic out of me, even though, it is more my story. There's still references in there to people of influence. Because I was, wasn't really on campus until my master's, it was more around just me being dedicated, and where you wanted to explore and learn more, there were always opportunities to do that. And whoever were my lecturers or supervisors, the door was always open. They were always happy for me to come in and ask questions, etc. So I think that was really valuable for me. And just having the curiosity, especially when a lecturer comes up to you and asks about what do you want to do after your master's, just the curiosity of people taking into consideration everyone in the room, not just sort of sharing information and that's it. So that's definitely been influential for me.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So you finished your studies in 2014. You were talking about it just before. It was a difficult period in your life around this time. I guess, how did you navigate this and what kept you going?
So when I was doing my master's, so 2014 I finished my master's, and Mum passed away in 2010. So during that time, I definitely struggled a little bit because I had a gap between doing my fourth year and then my master's because I was still competing. However, what kept me going was absolutely realising that I didn't know what was coming next at one point. So I was doing my master's while I was navigating grief of losing Mum. My horse, I had competed at the World Equestrian Games in 2010 and my horse didn't travel very well. And so he nearly died travelling to that event, which was a huge it was a lot to take from that perspective. I was able to compete, but I really just valued being able to be there and get my horse home. And Mum was really sick at the same time and we lost her 3 months later. So what got me through was realising that we don't always have to be superhuman. The mask can come off, and it did, and I allowed it to come off. And I, struggled a lot with the grief. It impacted me in ways that showed up in my mental health, with anxiety, and I found the comfort through connection and with my friends. And I knew that life was not great at that point, and I didn't really know where I wanted to go, especially because my sporting career potentially was over because my horse wasn't going to be eligible for the London Paralympics. And I just sat with it, and I just let my life kind of unfold in a way without trying to control it. And that was the perspective I brought with me at that time. I'm not sure where this is going to go, but I'm not going to try and make it something it's not, and just sit with the discomfort of what was happening for me. And then it actually allowed me to, I guess, learn more about myself in ways that I hadn't probably understood because I was so used to having the long-term goals and the smaller goals. So the acceptance of the unknown was really important for me there. And by not trying to control what was coming next allowed me to do things that I never thought I was able to do. And, I was never a runner at school. As I said, I hyperventilated during the 800, and I discovered running, not because I was enjoying it, but it helped with my mental health. And so I just started running, and I really missed the connection of sport because I wasn't around the equestrian world as much then. And so I joined a local sort of, the local gym kind of run group, and that's where I was getting that sense of community back and that connection. And then I went on and, long story short, I actually found out I was pretty good at this swim, bike and run business. And where I thought I was going to be on a start line on a horse at the Paralympics, turned out I was on a beach at Copacabana about to do a triathlon. And I think if I had the mindset that it was all over, I wouldn't, after equestrian, then it definitely wouldn't have flourished the way it did. And I'm so grateful of just showing up and kept going. And for me, the thing that really stood out for me at the time was not knowing the outcome. So this art of acceptance of, if I make the start line, I make the start line, I may not.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I can't control that at this point. All I can do is control how I show up. And so I took what I knew about high performance sport from a mental side and accepted and was okay with the fact that I was now a learner again in a new craft, right? And so then I went and spoke to other athletes, coaches, athletes that were either the juniors, Olympians, Paralympians, just doing sort of community triathlon, whoever, and just absorbed as much as I could. And wherever there was an opportunity to train with people that would make me a better athlete, I did. And that's kind of the approach I took. And I don't think you can grow or go anywhere that will allow you to discover your full potential unless you're uncomfortable. And the whole time I was. And I grew so much through that time. So it wasn't easy. It was definitely challenging, but it was probably one of the best things I've ever done.
That's incredible. What an incredible outcome. And what I guess is the lesson for others in letting go in those moments of true vulnerability, really, and being open to whatever comes next and just ceasing the control that, you don't have in those moments.
Yeah, I feel that it is something that you can't rush. So you can't make assumptions about where we should or shouldn't be at certain parts of our career or our life. And things may change, but things may change not the way we think they're going to change. So never making assumptions about it. If something doesn't go the way you may have thought it could or would or wanted long term, it doesn't mean it's the end. It can just shift in a different way, and it's essentially one door closes, a new one opens. It's just how willing are you to walk through that new door? And so that was definitely my approach to everything. And just we really have to sit in the discomfort because there's so much going on in our world. If you think about it at the moment, everything that's going on, like there is a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of change. And if I go back to one of the biggest things when I was studying, the only constant is change. So how do we get comfortable with
change?
With change, because it is the thing that's going to be constant, not just in our world, but in our lives. So embracing that and being calm in the chaos is something that I guess I just really enjoy. And I think it's something that it's okay for things to be unknown. You
ended up making your debut in the women's PT4 at Rio in the 2016 Paralympic Games. What was that feeling like when you finally stood on the start line? What did that moment represent for you?
It was a whirlwind of emotion. It was, for context, I had missed out on I'd made the long list for 2 Paralympic campaigns in equestrian. So Beijing, and then I had the World Equestrian Games where I had the unfortunate situation where my horse got really sick, which therefore meant I wasn't going to make the team for London. And even before Beijing, I was really close to almost making the team. So it was a long time coming. And for me to stand on that start line, not with a horse.
Like doing a completely different sport.
About to go into Copacabana Beach, it was phenomenal. But actually what I didn't prepare for was how overwhelming it was going to be, because I had waited and wanted that moment to come for so long that then I was actually in it. And there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of, music, there's a lot going on. And you have to go and now perform at your best and quieten the noise. And I didn't prepare as much as I, could have in that moment, but I wasn't aware of how much the emotion was going to hit me, because it also was a passion of my mum's as well. The horses was something we shared together, and I always thought I'd be there on a horse and she would be there with me, and I wasn't on a horse and she wasn't there with me. So the whole emotion of the grief that got me through the training initially was something I had to deal with, and it really came out in that moment of the overwhelm. Yeah. And that's the other thing, then it comes back to our mindset, and we think about mental energy and recovery. Like it is so much a mental game, more so than a physical one, because that race was hard for me because of the mental side to it and what I was carrying emotionally. So the body will do what the mind allows it to do, and so that was another pivotal moment for me. But it was phenomenal being on that start line, and I remember a lot of it so clearly. I hadn't been in the sport I'd been in the sport for less than 2 years. So
Ridiculous.
I was still very immature in my triathlon years. So I was just still learning as well. But I held third. I held bronze for most of it, and then it unravelled a bit on the run, which was, I guess, my Achilles heel back then. So of it all, but yeah, so grateful to be on that start line. It was an amazing experience.
It's a huge achievement. Only 2 years doing that sport.
Less than 2 years,
A completely different sport.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Because someone told me that would be far-fetched going from a community triathlon to Rio.
Interesting. Another piece of the thread that ties all of this together.
Swimming in the local pool, and the coach in that local tri club said, so what sort of racing you want to do? And I said, I really want to try and get to Rio for the Paralympics. And he said, that's a bit far-fetched, isn't it? Going from try to Rio. And I said, right, game on. Game on.
Turning can't into can.
Yeah.
Everywhere, in every industry, in every sport. I wonder what's next. You welcomed your first child, Henrik, in 2018, and returned to the circuit only 6 months after his birth. Firstly, that's incredible. Tell us about this period of your life, and what was it like to compete again?
It was one of the most memorable times of my racing career. I can win medals, but you can't win moments that will last forever. And I was so grateful I had those, especially when Henrik was born. And the thing about sport is, and about having children, you can't time things as well as you might want. So we fell pregnant with Henrik just after World Championships. So we were quite fortunate in that time from being able to go back and race. I could align it. But I was adamant that my number one role was being a mum. And Henrik, as a baby, and he still is today, but he was so calm and chill. And so I wanted to be the mum that was up with him at night. I didn't want to sacrifice my breastfeeding. And so, again, pivotal people that have impact. My coach was amazing, that she allowed for the flexibility of having Henrik when we're at training. The places we trained allowed for that support. If she actually helped me to be at training sessions, she would help look after him. Even when I was racing, I remember she would have him in the baby carrier, and I think he was a bit upset, but I was winning. So she's kind of like coaching, but, shaking the baby, and had him turn.
That's an amazing coach.
Yeah, Danielle Stefano is probably one of the most amazing people.
Good job. You're setting the standard. Yeah,
and so if it wasn't for her, I definitely wouldn't have thrived through that time. And just having the support of my husband and family. Triathlon Australia were amazing, because there wasn't actually anything any policies, I guess, in regards to parental leave.
Right.
So if I wasn't racing, I wasn't going to get my money, my funding, which is going to make it very hard, because I needed to have time off. And the high performance director at the time, he said, doesn't matter if there's nothing in place, we will make sure Kate stays on, and so she can have what they then call parental leave. And now I know it's evolved a lot more in that space. But if it wasn't for people like my coach and the high performance director at the time, I wouldn't have been able to return the way I did. And they actually helped me have support with having a nanny to come to some of the races if I didn't have my husband there. And, you know, it wasn't always fair on my coach to probably have Henrik, and she definitely stood in where she could. So that was great. And there's photos of me out there on the start line breastfeeding Henrik, and people are warming up around me. And, you know, I could have been really overwhelmed by that, but I was so proud of being a mum and doing my sport. And it actually made me a better athlete and a better performer out there, because it helped me put a lot more into perspective around racing, and, you know, the stories we tell ourselves are not being good enough or being defined by outcomes and medals. And those moments I'll never forget. I've been travelling around the world with Henrik and racing, regardless of, you know, what the outcome was.
What races did you do during this time, and was the hope to go to the Paralympics again?
Yeah, so my first race back was in Australia. It was in our Oceania series. So I think I was in Newcastle and then Tassie and Devonport, one of my favourite races. And then over into Italy, into Switzerland for the World Championships. And then back, that was in 2019, and then building into the last qualifying period. Also into Montreal.
Wow.
In there with Henrik. So there was a few in there. And
went everywhere.
Tokyo test event. Yeah, he's been everywhere. Can't remember any of it. And a lot of places there. And so the plan was, under the guidance of Danielle, a really progressive build to peak at the right time and not come back and try to be a hero. Like, let's just take it slowly. And it was working really well. I had the best race of my career in February 2020. And that was the last qualifying period before the last block of qualifying before unofficially, I guess, making the team. So actually meeting all the criteria to make the team for Tokyo. And then in that space of having my best race in my carear, COVID came. Yeah, and so what that meant was another career-defining moment, because the Games, apart from the fact we couldn't travel and realising that was not going to happen, was like, whoa. And then actually the reality that the Games were going to be postponed was like, wow, this is full on. So when that was postponed, that was going to be, I think, another 12 months from a timeline perspective. And I was ready to retire, you know, had a little boy. I was working, and we also wanted to have another baby. So I couldn't... I didn't want to sacrifice what that time would be, you know, to have another baby just to go to the Games. And it was a really hard decision for me. And I wasn't, you know, at the time I didn't want to retire. But I also wanted to have another baby, so it wasn't that straightforward. And as the world changed, everything else changed too, with sponsorships and stuff, because no one knew what COVID was going to bring. So I actually worked with Paul Penner as my sports psychologist at the time, and still good friends with him. And he helped me also lean into this, you know, this para perspective, because I always envisioned that my career pinnacle would be, I went to Rio, that was great, that was kind of learning curve. Now I'm back for Tokyo, bigger and better and stronger mentally, physically. And I always, I guess, had assumed that was going to be where I'd have my best performance. And once I realised, when people were saying to me, oh, you can retire, it's all right, you've had a great career in sport, you want to go get a coffee? And I'm like, don't you get it? Like, this is my life. This is everything I've worked towards. How is that simple for you? Because I wasn't seeing what they saw. They were seeing Kate the person, not Kate the performer. They were seeing something that I wasn't necessarily giving myself credit for. They didn't care if I had 1,000 medals or none, right? But I was defining what would be the pinnacle of my career, potentially to be at a race in Tokyo and potentially on the podium. Now, it was likely I was going to be on that team because I'd met the criteria, but there was no guarantee what would happen on the day. We don't know what would happen on the day. And so through working with Paul, it was amazing, because he helped me start to unravel the fact that I had so many gold medal moments, and the race that I always wanted for me as a person, the performance that I actually felt was the best I would ever be, I just had 2 weeks prior.
Yeah.
Just happened to be that it wasn't at Tokyo. I'd got everything I was wanting to achieve in sport there. And so having perspective like that, and, you know, especially having support to help shift your own perspective to see things that potentially you don't see, can be life-changing. And so it allowed me to go on and transition more effectively.
That's so good that you had someone allow you to see the whole, the sum of the parts, not just one performance.
Well, what were people seeing that I wasn't, and why was that? I couldn't connect it. It just made me angry, and like, how do I figure this out? So often we attach a lot of our self-worth to what we do rather than who we are. So that was a really challenging time for me, but a great time to really lean in and understand what was happening for me.
Yeah, it's a really good lesson. Let's talk about this book. So you've just released The Hand You're Dealt. Let's hold it up. It's a powerful and honest story about turning adversity into opportunity. Why did you feel that now was the right time to tell your story? And how do you feel about setting it free into the world?
Yeah, well, that's a funny one. So I always wanted to write a book. I always thought it would be about my career as an equestrian athlete and growing up with disability. And turns out that was only the beginning. And I love books. I love learning. I love reading. Growing up, I got so much out of reading other people's stories.
Yeah.
And so I guess for me, that was something that I found was quite unique, and I felt very, very privileged to be able to read other people's stories, and for people to talk about things through words in a book when you haven't even met them, but you feel so connected and you can learn through it. And so for me, that was one of the reasons to write this book. The other thing being, I simply just wanted to write a book. So to have the opportunity to do it was great, and to share my story. And the other thing too is for my kids, for me, they'll have more of the story behind the mum when they're older. So that's something that I wish I had more of from my mum. And so I've written it for them as well. And for anyone else that will learn from it, I've already had people saying, wow, there were things about your life that I didn't know, and it's already making me think differently. So if it can... People that know you. Yeah, and if it can influence one person, especially someone younger or older, in a way that positively impacts their life, then why wouldn't I write a book? So, yeah, I'm grateful that it's there for people to read.
And who should be reading this book?
Everybody. I think anyone that feels like life limits them, because that is a perspective that we have, and life isn't easy. It's challenging, but it doesn't mean we can't grow and become what we want, or do things we may want to do. We just might do them a bit differently. So that's why the title is The Hand You're Dealt, because you can't always choose the card life does deal you, but you can choose how you play the hand. And so that's the whole philosophy behind it, and how I've lived my life. So I think it's relevant for everyone.
Well said. Let's end with some quick fire questions. Sure. What's one thing that you wish more people understood about disability? Disability is, I like to just simply put it, it's not a thing. When people just realise everyone's different, and the world needs to facilitate people's differences, not necessarily through what we coin disability, through likes, preferences, different cars we like, whatever it is, right? Everyone's different. If we can just realise that there's not one size fits all in anything anymore, that would be great. And I think if there is a lesson in it, is never be shy to ask questions, because the more you're worried about how you're going to say it, that can impact someone in a way that you don't intend. So just be curious. Say, I noticed you didn't, you've got a hand difference, or born without a hand. What happened? I appreciate people doing that, rather than feeling like, I can't say anything or do anything. Let's pretend exist. Or whatever. And so don't
don't be awkward about it. Because more
Don't
often
be
than
awkward
not,
about it.
more often than not, the person with disability won't be. So you don't need to feel awkward about it. But also, if they don't want to talk about it, they will tell you, and they actually won't mind, you asking. So yeah,
good advice. What's your favourite sport to watch?
Ooh, that's interesting. To watch versus play. Oh, I'd have to say AFL. Done a bit of work with some players, and I do like watching them when you know them behind the scenes. Can't play it at all, but if it's a sport to play, it would definitely be triathlon and dressage.
Amazing. And what's next for you?
I do have book 2. Just in the process of finalising that with a great publisher. And that is about all the work that I do today. So sort of what comes after this one and the so what of that now in performance and corporate and high performance sport. So that will be something that will keep me ticking away.
Is it going to be mostly advice, or is it going to be a mix of advice and more of your story?
Both, yeah, a bit of both.
Yeah.
So that is looking to probably come out early 27. And outside of that, doing more of what I love. I feel so grateful and privileged to be able to work with a lot of senior leaders about helping them unlock these elements of performance and what does it mean. Bringing different perspective, and very humbled to walk into offices of people that have become professional in what they do. So I'm always inspired by other people that, have got to quite high roles in the past they've taken. So I love being in the room where I get to learn from them just as much as they do from me. So hopefully that will just keep continuing.
Fantastic. Busy times ahead.
Yeah. But loving it.
Kate Naess, it was great to talk to you today. You're an amazing example of testing assumptions and turning can'ts into cans. So thank you so much for joining us on Stories of Wonder.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode of Stories of Wonder. If you enjoyed it, you can like and subscribe. You can also join the conversation by leaving a comment below. You can learn more about this story through the links in the description. And for more conversations like this, check out the full series on YouTube or on your favourite podcasting platform. See you next time.